reading of the passage. You will get it as we go along. Let's go ahead. Good morning or evening. Today we are going to be examining Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 33. I want to start by introducing it by saying that Paul did not write Romans because he thought Christians could use a theologically dense epistle. Paul did not write Romans because he wanted to take shots at homosexuals, but you will see that Paul explains to his audience how sodomites emerged because it is not natural function of man. It is not the natural course of man. Now, you need to recognize that Paul is speaking to Roman Christians. At this time, he had known them by reputation. Earlier in chapter 1, he mentions this. There may have been correspondence, but Paul is writing this in response to something that they're going through. And we can speculate that as much as we'd like, but we don't have their letter to Paul or anything like that. But the text today kind of presumes the question these Christians were asking, how do we go about our lives living in the midst of this evil city, in this evil empire? And in verse 17, if you want to go there, it's right before this passage. Paul says, "For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith." So he's going to use the foil of Rome to juxtapose versus righteous living here in Romans, and I think that's very important. Now, of course, here Paul is citing the prophets because the epistle to Rome, Paul is imitating Christ as the prophet of the Munus Triplex. Now, throughout Timothy and Titus, you see Paul use the term man of God, specifically like 1 Timothy 6, where Paul tells his son Timothy, be a man of God. This title is reserved specifically for prophets. And Paul is doing this here in Romans 1. Now, when I say prophets, a lot of people think of this idea of someone who has this foretelling into the future. Maybe God has something planned and God is relaying this back to him. But what you see in the biblical prophets is that they spend most of their time not foretelling into the future, but forthtelling into the now. Forthtelling right now. And you see that this is precisely what Paul is doing here. Paul is addressing what Christians are seeing with their very own eyes. And Paul, as well as every other preacher since, if they're worth their weight in salt, they do this. They speak to the people that they're talking to, that they're dealing with. They're contextualizing the Word of God to give them true religion for the sin that they see out amongst the people. And that's where we are right here. So today the sermon title is The Sin Vortex to Hell. I don't know, most of you have children, I know, and you've probably given them baths. When you're draining the bathtub toward the end, you see a little tornado starting to spin, and the water starts draining faster and faster and faster until it's gone. That's kind of the metaphor that we're going to be seeing here in this text. Now, if you're taking notes, and I suggest you do, there are 3 R's we can derive from the text, which will be my section titles. First, rejection. Second, response. And third, reprobation. Now, let's go to verse 19. The passage is 18, but we're going to get there. We're going to start at 19 and work a little bit backwards. Let's read it. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Here, Paul is speaking to man's natural state. Every man knows the knowledge of God. It is innate in him. It is inseparable from him. But, let's go to verse 18, going back a little bit. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. What truth? The truth of God. The truth that he is the creator. You're not giving him his due. Moving on to verse 21, for although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. They have the first step. Their first foot is in that vortex. They just dip their toe in. They do not honor God. Although they knew him, they chose not to honor him. Now, continuing in verse 21, it says, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. God has given their minds over to be infected by this. And what does this lead to? In verse 23, it says it right here. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal men, the birds, the animals, and the creeping things. Man is stuck in idolatry. So first you fail to recognize God, you start to get stupid, and then you start idol worshiping. We're now rungs down in this vortex. Now, how does God respond? This is the second point. Let's look at verse 24. Therefore, God gave them up in their lust of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among them. Here we have God having the authority to give them over into sin. A lot of people call this the doctrine of theodicy. We all deserve death when we are into sin. But God has given forbearance that we would not die immediately because He has that right. When we sin, He can judge us and end us. But He gives us the grace to live and to continue. Why? For His glory, as we learned this morning. Thank you, Dax. So here we are, going to verse 25. Because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, they worshiped and served creature rather than Creator, who is blessed forever. So here we have sexual perversion because they serve creature rather than Creator. So if you're following along, they do not honor God, they start idol worshiping, and then God gives them over into sexual perversion. It's unnatural sex. Now here Paul is going to be speaking about sodomy, specifically homosexual relations. But is that any different than any other sexual sin like lust? I would say they're both sins. Absolutely. They're both a condition of our fallenness. But here we have Paul specifically calling out what is unnatural sexual use. Now, if you lust after your, cute secretary at work, yeah, you got problems. But here we're taking it a step further, where these people are giving their hearts into something even more disreputable, something worse. In fact, if you read The City of God by St. Augustine, he talks about how even in Roman days, it was just shameful and disgusting that men would be, effeminate and speak in such, lofty languages. Like, it's repulsive even to the Romans. And yet here we have Paul basically saying that it's so unnatural. It just doesn't comport with just, adultery. It's worse. Moving on to verse 26. For this reason, God gave them up into dishonorable passions. For their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another. Men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error, which is death. Now the third section is reprobation, verse 28. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not be done. Paul returns to this initial point. We've already gone down from not honoring God to idolatry, down into unnatural sexual desires. And then he returns us to the initial point. Remember, all this is because you fail to honor God. Now, when I say reprobation, a lot of people are thinking, okay, Reformed doctrine of reprobation, John Calvin, maybe predestination. However, I'm using it as the term of the unprincipled wretch, the unrooted person. Because they reject God, they have no true foundation. Thus, their mind is foolishness, which has been led to debasement. Here we are coming to the end of the vortex. The weight of the force has you spiraling faster and faster, filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. That's verses 29 through 31. Faster and faster they invent new sins, new methods to do evil. But it doesn't end there. Everyone knows that misery loves company. Going to verse 32. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice them. They know they will receive God's just judgment. But rather than warn others to avoid their fate, they give approval to others destined to die and ultimately recruit others to join them in the pit. At this point, you realize the force pulling people down isn't merely this internal sin struggle with an individual, but it's an entire system of people just pulling people down into this black hole. But you know what? The person who goes down that black hole typically doesn't care. They don't honor God. Elon Musk said about 2 weeks ago that he doesn't mind if he goes to hell. The majority of people are going to be there anyways. He doesn't honor God. So let's go back to verse 18, at the very beginning. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Now there's a fourth R that's not in this passage, but I want you to write it down. It's restoration. Men sinking deeper and deeper into this vortex will die, assuredly. But Christ, hear me now, reaches into that water and can pull you out and restore you. You are no longer love what is evil. You will no longer be ruthless, boastful, faithless, and heartless. Rather, Jesus Christ will give you a new heart. You will finally give him that honor that could have kept you out of that vortex. Now, remember, Paul is addressing a specific audience here. What would Paul write to the American church? Because we're dealing with a lot of this too. We can apply this text to the unnatural lusts that are rampant in our society. And this is why the church really can't accept this concept of celibate but gay Christians, much less celibate but gay preachers like the PCA has in Greg Johnson. There are numerous regenerate ex-gay people who no longer have those desires. But when the church decides, just as long as you don't, act on those, it's A-okay. But that's not what Paul's saying here. He's saying that even that desire has been, God has put them in that because they're going to get judgment. When God restores you and gives you regeneration, he takes away that desire. And secondly, this is why the church cannot accept transsexualism. Inventing new ways to do evil, new ways to reject God. Like verse 23 explains, they exchanged God for the images resembling mankind. What is transsexualism if not worshiping some other body and wishing to have it? Wishing to mutilate yourself for that idol. And finally, this is why the church cannot accept pedophilia. Not only are their lusts despicable, but they sit at the bottom of the vortex and they attempt to pull children in with them. In 2021, the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus organized a YouTube video that went quite viral, proclaiming, "We are coming for your kids." For the past decade, transsexual drag beasts have been dressing up like demons and reading books to children about alternative sexual identities and alternative sexual practices. Teachers in public schools are incorporating alternative sexuality into education, prompting Florida lawmakers to pass a bill firing any teacher or administrator that introduces sexual expression to children. People think this is just some modern phenomenon that just popped up in the last year or two. It's not. If you know, or if you're old enough, you may know the name Jocelyn Elders. This was Bill Clinton's Surgeon General. Her idea, in order to curb the teen pregnancy epidemic, was to teach children as young as 5 years old how to masturbate in the class. This is not new. This is 1993, 94, when she got fired eventually. Like, they've been trying to do this for ages. And then recently, within the last 2 months, you had a once beloved institution created by a man who wished to spread joy to children, now being run by those who are at the bottom of this vortex. Video has linked of an internal conference call of Disney executives speaking to their employees, gleefully boasting about inserting queer and transgender worship into films with, quote, little to no resistance from anyone. They brag that they put it in anywhere, and no one cares. No one stops them. Now, you Christians, hear me now. You ought to reject Disney. Unsubscribe from their streaming services. Vow never to enter the theater and give them another dime. They cannot be trusted with the images and the themes that they're giving your children. All of entertainment now is mostly subversive, and that's their business model. When people tell you what they're doing, you best believe them. They're doing this intentionally. They are coming for your children's minds and their souls because they're at the bottom of that vortex. Quit opening your wallet to these groomers. And if you can't give up Marvel for the sake of your children, if you continue down this, you will be complicit in their evil. You are doing precisely what verse 32 warns. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice these things. Ephesians 5:11 says, have no fellowship with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. 2 Corinthians 6, what fellowship has righteousness with unrighteousness? What communion hath the light with darkness? True Christians love what God loves, but on the flip side, true Christians hate what God hates. Do not let their judgments, the millstone that is coming upon their neck, become yours as well. Now, what do you mean, Sean? I'm a regenerate Christian. And I say to you right now, the plant that arose in the rocky soil probably believed itself to be just like the plant that arose from the good soil. I'm always amused at Reformed Christians who, look at decision theology, people who said the prayer, and they're living this life. We call them cultural Christians or nominal Christians. Look at them. They're out there living a life just like the unbeliever. And then a lot of Christians who hold that opinion go home and they sit on the couch with their children and flop down and turn on the same diet of media just like the nominal Christian and just like the unbeliever. We are to be salt and light. Be different than the world. Christians must be allergic to evil, and you must resist. Paul declared in Romans 12, verse 9, to this exact same audience, hate what is evil, and cling to what is good. I yield the floor.